In this program, we're going to turn our attention to ourselves, or more precisely, to the psychological concept of self, the individual's consciousness of his or her own identity. What does the mind's eye see when it looks into the self, into that special mirror that reveals one's innermost thoughts and feelings, our own private world we so often hide from others? Ancient Greeks who traveled to the oracle at Delphi for answers to their problems found this message inscribed on the shrine: "Know thyself." Centuries later, it was William James who in 1890 set the stage for the modern resurgence of psychology's interest in the self. In studying what he called the mind from within, James distinguished three aspects of the self: the material, the spiritual, and the social. The material self is our awareness of the physical world, our body and the people and things around us. The spiritual self is the part that thinks of ourselves as thinkers, the inner witness to events. And the part of the self that focuses on the images we create in the minds of others is called the social self. While it was William James who pioneered the scientific concept of self, many earlier philosophers and writers had also recognized this dimension of human nature. Some psychologists believe that the gradual separation of the young child from its mother, a process called individuation, is essential for developing a unique sense of self and a healthy personality. Failure to acquire an independent self-identity can lead to psychological problems. Today, many psychologists are keenly interested in studying the self. But there was a time when psychology focused almost exclusively on behavior. There was no place for anything as fuzzy as the concept of self. Even to Freud, the conscious self was little more than a weak, passive link in his triad of id, ego, and superego. Freud defined the id as the primitive unconscious part of the personality where drives and passions originate. The superego restrains the id. For Freud, the superego is a combination of the conscience and the ideal self. The ego, our conscious sense of self-identity, moderates between the id and superego, between our primitive impulses and our sense of moral obligation. Freud was much more interested in the dramatic confrontations between the unconscious id and the superego than he was in conscious processes of the ego. But other psychologists, such as Carl Rogers, seen here in the 1960s, put a much greater emphasis on aspects of the conscious self. Rogers led the humanistic movement, which was most responsible for psychology's return to the self. Instead of Freud's pessimistic view of a conflicted, impulse-driven creature, Rogers offered an optimistic vision of psychological growth and health.
There is within the individual a capacity for self-understanding, for self-direction, for guiding behavior in self-directed ways, which can be tapped if we can provide the right conditions. In other words, the individual does have a capacity and a potentiality for development and change and integration that doesn't need to be supplied from the outside.
And so we see in the humanistic view a self that is striving toward personal fulfillment, an inner guiding force that moves us toward positive actions and enhancement. It is a self imbued with the kind of virtue that gives humans kinship with the angels. For psychologists, the next step after describing the properties of the self has been to explore just how this dynamic mental structure works in controlling behavior. Researchers who study the self talk of the self concept, the individual's awareness of his or her continuing identity as a person. This self-concept is viewed as an internal regulator of thoughts, feelings, and behavior. It interprets and organizes our ongoing experiences. It reflects on how our present actions compare with our standards and expectations. And it affects our performance by providing plans, scripts, goals, and incentives. We organize our beliefs and information about ourselves in terms of schemas or knowledge clusters. For some people, gender schemas are all important. Masculinity and femininity dominates their thinking. Other people are weight schematic, always trying to lose weight and perceiving others primarily in terms of being fat, out of control, or being thin, having it all together. Our self-schema or self-image can have a powerful impact on our behavior. If our self-image is good, we try to live up to this standard. We try harder and succeed more often. If our self-image is bad, we tend to adjust downward and end up failing more often. So self-image can work for or against us. Along this line, Albert Bandura of Stanford has developed what he calls the theory of self-efficacy, a new theory of how the self works, which can help us understand how some people translate promise and passion into optimal performance.
Well, self-efficacy is concerned with people's beliefs in their capabilities to exercise control over situations that affect their lives. People who have a high sense of efficacy tend to take on challenges that they believe they can master, whereas those who are plagued by self-doubts tend to shy away from activities and situations that they feel exceed their coping capabilities. And these kind of choices can affect the kind of career paths and life paths they pursue.
Bandura and his colleagues conduct experiments, manipulating factors that affect self-efficacy and demonstrating how self-efficacy influences performance. In this experiment, researcher Delia Chaffee gives the subject the task of improving production at a model furniture factory. She tells him that his ability to make good decisions for the factory is based on innate intelligence and ability.
The higher one's basic capacities and these skills, the better one will perform. Now, the computer program pretty much paces you through it, evaluating and testing your decisions.
The next subject is told that complex decision-making is an acquirable skill, that his performance can improve through his own efforts.
In any new skill, one doesn't begin with faultless performance, but the more one practices formulating and testing decisions, the better one gets at it.
The first subject, who thinks decision-making ability is a measure of his intelligence, proceeds cautiously. He sets lower goals for himself and is frustrated by an increasing number of incorrect decisions. His confidence, measured by the number on the lower left of the screen, keeps falling, as does his sense of efficacy. The second subject, however, sees early mistakes as a necessary part of learning. He profits by them, and his performance improves. He sets higher goals for himself, and his response to questions about confidence demonstrate an increasing sense of his own efficacy.
The issue is not what you have, but how you use what you have. And from this point of view, you see, you can have the same competencies and subskills and use them poorly, adequately, or extraordinarily, depending on your self-belief. So for this reason, you can often predict people's accomplishments better from their self-belief rather than from their just past attainments.
Up till now, we've been concentrating on that part of the self which focuses inward to assess its capabilities. But there's another aspect of the self that focuses outward to get a fix on the impression being created in others. This outward focus, the awareness of the social self, asks the questions, how am I coming across? What impression am I creating? Do you see me the way I see myself? Do you see me the way I'd like you to see me? Here at Stanford University's theater department, Patricia Ryan teaches drama and the nuances of self-presentation in American culture. Hi, Patricia.
Hello, Phil.
As a drama teacher, you train actors in self-presentational skills to help them convey an impression to an audience. How does that work?
Well, there's a concept we use called status, which has to do with how we manipulate the affect of ourself to one another. The content in a given circumstance can be the same, but the way in which I speak to you, the way that I use nonverbal cues, will affect my relationship to you. There are 4 aspects that we can manipulate in terms of status transactions. The first of these would be eye contact. And it's commonly known that eye contact is a useful device in asserting oneself. As I'm continuing to talk about this subject, start averting your gaze from time to time. Fail to make eye contact with me, but stay in the scene and continue to listen, but just change the way in which you relate. Something has shifted in the way nothing else has shifted except that you're not really looking at me. How does it make you feel when you do that?
Disengaged. I mean, we're not in synchrony the way we were before.
Another variable, of course, is whether or not the body is moving in a sustained way or whether it has sort of jerky movements. As soon as I begin to kind of move my body in jerky ways, it also affects my speech, you notice. It's hard to sustain sentences when I'm moving and my head's moving up and down. Yeah. And a lot of people kind of, but it at the cost of their status in some cases. So that the prototype for high status would be someone who is basically calm, who speaks in complete sentences, breathes deeply, makes eye contact, and doesn't have any particular jerky mannerisms.
Can we demonstrate some of these?
Yes, we could. There's a short scene in which we'll play ourselves just coming to meet one another. The scene begins. You say hello.
Hello.
And I say hello. And you say, been waiting long.
Been waiting long.
And I say, ages.
That's going to be constant in all the scenes?
Right. Now, the first time we play it, why don't you come in maintaining high status kinds of postures with the eyes and face and body, and I'll play low status behavior and see what the result is.
All right, let's do it.
Okay. Ages. Okay. Good. Why don't you try, let's switch who is high status, and I'll be high status staying here, and you enter the scene in a low status mode.
Hello.
Hello.
Been waiting long?
Ages. Good. All right, then not only can we manipulate our own status, it's possible to lower the status of the person you're with.
All right.
Let's try that.
Hello.
Hello.
Been waiting long?
Ages.
Status transactions take place all the time between all kinds of people. They're a form of interpersonal communication in which people establish their relative degrees of social status and power. They demonstrate as well as anything the social aspects of the self-concept. To manage the impression we create in others, we all engage in what's called strategic self-presentation. How we present ourselves to others so that they'll see us the way we see ourselves.
Take that, into your body and make it so grand that it would be almost total melodrama.
Diana Giardella is a Boston area psychotherapist and actress who uses the tools of acting to explore the process of strategic self-presentation.
Okay. And there you are this little. You are down there.
In the following scenes, she will demonstrate how this process of self-presentation works.
Oh, I feel so lousy. I don't think things could get much worse.
Hi.
Hi.
Are you going to the concert tonight?
I don't know. I feel really down. I don't know. I'm in a really bummed out place. I don't think I can deal with it.
I was thinking...
Other people react to us according to the context our behavior has created. Then we see the way they respond to us, which confirms our original belief about the kind of person we really are.
I blew it again.
It's a closed circle, what researcher Mark Snyder has called behavioral confirmation. Our beliefs, our sense of self, create their own reality. That's why depressed people elicit negative reactions and tend to be treated as if, in fact, they are inadequate. While extroverts create an easygoing social climate in which others tend to respond positively to them.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. You going to the concert tonight?
Yeah, I am. Looking forward to it.
Great.
You coming?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
I'll see you there.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Who we are is part of a constant cycle of internal and external perceptions, beliefs, and behaviors. One of the most important factors that influence our identity is the cultural context in which we live. Cultural psychologist Hazel Marcus of Stanford University looks at the intimate connection between the self and culture.
When we talk about self, we're talking about the way in which the biological being becomes a person. Becoming a person is a social endeavor. You can be a biological being all by yourself, but to become a person, to become a self, you have to engage with or take on or incorporate the cultural meanings, cultural ideas, cultural practices. You have to use those to become a person. You can't be a self by yourself. You can be a biological entity, but to be a person, to be a self, you have to do it in some set of culture-specific ways.
Culture can be seen not as biologically based, but rather socially based. It is a set of behaviors and attitudes we adopt as a means of defining who we are.
Lots of people tend to think of culture as something inside people, like some entity or some essence. Often people will think about Americans have some kind of American genes or American traits or some kind of American attributes that make them American. It's absolutely not that. Culture is what you do. And so if you take a person and have that person connect with and use American ideas and American ways of doing things, that person will be an American. If you take that same person and put that person in a Japanese context, that person will become Japanese in that sense. Culture is a matter of the common ideas and the common ways of doing things.
We can view culture and self as a collaboration. Culture shapes self, and self perpetuates culture. This idea is known as mutual constitution, and it is reflected in the artifacts, art, literature, even the media of all societies.
Most of us are exposed to hundreds, maybe thousands of images in a given day. A lot of them you don't pay a lot of attention to, but they're out there, and they shape our thinking about how to be a person, how to be a self. This is Dennis Rodman. It says, he's not the boy next door. That's important because none of us, as Americans, want to be the boy next door. This is, for a cologne, a declaration of independence. What does that have to do with a cologne? Who knows? But we are, after all, a culture of the individual. Ditch the Joneses. It used to be that keeping up with the Joneses is the thing to do. But now it's important not only to be up to them, be a little bit different from the Joneses. You will never see an ad in Japanese advertisements that says, ditch the Kiriyamas. You know, it just wouldn't be a sentiment that would work in Japan. In Japan, the goal of being a person is to be connected with others. So this is an ad that reflects that idea. The ad says, win the nearest to the pin contest. Well, clearly only one person can win the nearest to the pin contest, but they don't just show one golfer all by him or herself out on the greens, as I think an American ad might show. Instead, what they show is the whole group. They're happy to be together. The way to be is to be part of it. Not different, not separate, not unique, but with others. More and more people these days have the opportunity, really, of being bi or tricultural. It's not a simple thing to do, but it'll be the task of more and more people in the world.
One of the greatest challenges to cultural identity is overcoming the threat of bigotry. The ethnic and racial prejudices of a dominant culture can eat away at the self-regard of minority people. Prejudice is a kind of psychological genocide that works across generations. It contributes to the despair, drug abuse, and violence we see in communities whose cultural identities are under siege. We see it in the high levels of depression, alcoholism, and suicide among Native Americans. And yet, even in the face of adversity, there is another side to the self that can create new realities, transforming life into art. This is what Alfred Adler called the creative self. Throughout history, men and women have put their creative imprint on anything that can be shaped, colored, or rearranged. Even in the depths of despair, prisoners of German concentration camps created art on whatever scraps of paper they could hide from their executioners, to give meaning to the incomprehensible horror of their lives and deaths. Teresa Amabile of Brandeis University is a leading researcher in the psychology of creativity and the self.
We did a study a few years ago looking at the effects of competition on children's creativity. Competition obviously includes elements of reward and evaluation and that competitive aspect also. We did this in the context of a party, a group sort of situation. We ran two different parties in a community center in an apartment complex. We invited half of the girls who lived in the apartment complex to come to an art party on Saturday, and the other half we invited to come to an art party on Sunday. These were girls ages 7 through 11. The key activity both days was making a paper collage. And we told the children, you can do anything you'd like, but we want it to be a silly sort of collage. We gave them all the same kind of theme to work with. For each group, before they started their collages, I stood up at the front of the room and I said, look, I have these 3 neat prizes up here. And I showed them. They were attractive things to 7-year-old, 11-year-old kids. In one group, the Sunday group, we said, we are going to award these prizes to the 3 best children, to the 3 best artworks, the children who made those, at the end of the art party. In the other group, the Saturday group, we said, we have these 3 prizes and we're going to raffle them off after you've made your artworks. So the prizes were there for both groups. However distracted they might have felt or excited was the same in both groups. The only difference was what those prizes meant. Was it competition or not? They all made their collages, and then later on, when we had artists look at all the collages made by the girls in both groups and rate them on creativity, we found that those made by the girls in the competition group were significantly less creative. The competition group children tended to make very ordinary kinds of symbols, whereas the children in the non-competition group, some of them used just a few pieces in their collage. Some of them used almost all the pieces that they had. They really did a lot of non-representational things in the non-competition group. We have found, as a grand principle in all of our research, that people will be most creative when they feel motivated primarily by the interest and enjoyment, the satisfaction, the challenge of the work itself, and not by external pressures.
So now you know some of the ways in which psychologists try to follow the Delphic oracle's exhortation to know thyself. We've explored a number of aspects of the self which each of us knows intimately, but which psychologists must try to understand objectively and scientifically. And we've also seen how we differ in our self-concepts and how our behavior differs as a result. In our next program, we're going to pursue this subject of individual differences a bit further, only this time from the perspective of psychologists whose job it is to measure these differences among us in creativity, intelligence, and personality. We'll find out how they do it and how well. Next time. I'm Philip Zimbardo.